crazy how much things have changed because, when I first came on, it was all magazines, and then all forums. Which was completely different. The forums, it was interesting, for as far as marketing and promotion, because there's so much more promotion now with with social media, but you're really forced to do it. You're forced to drive your engagement and promotion entirely by yourself. Where with the forums, you got, there were only so many of them, 10, they got used regularly. So you had that promotion of whatever forum was popular. You didn't have to drive your own engagement. So it's a really totally different approach to growing a business and creating, like a name and face in the industry.
Do you think it's a beneficial thing, or do you think it's worse now?
There's much more money in the industry now, but I think it's worse because, a kind of a perfect example is Phil Viz and I, who I've known Phil for 20 years. We used to get in discussions on like Muscle Mayhem or Intense Muscle, where he made a post about protein, really high protein intake, and I commented on his post, and then I made a video also kind of saying, I don't agree with, not that I don't agree, but here's why I think might be a better way. And 15 years ago, that would have turned into a discussion that might have been 50 pages long with 5,000 replies and 100,000 views. On my protein video, every comment is from people who follow me. It says, oh yeah, this is exactly, everything is perfect. And then his video is all people who follow him saying, oh, Justin's an idiot, what you say is right. And so it just kind of stifles discussion.
Yeah.
And that's everything in the world right now. It's just an echo chamber. Politics are the same. And that's the worst thing about social media. The good thing is there's so much money in the industry now if you're able to monetize and create an image and promote yourself. The bad thing is it's entirely promoting yourself, and there's really no checks or balances because your followers will believe whatever you say, and you don't have to worry about being right because you don't have to worry about your followers.
Yeah, it just turns into a dictatorship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to really educate because people are so stuck on what one person says. And that's why I had this podcast, is to try to have different people on. Like, Phil's my coach. I know exactly how Phil is, but I have all people on to just have discussions to help the people who are watching, like, get different inputs, as if it's kind of like a forum, I guess, right? You could take what we're going to say here, take what he's going to say, and, figure stuff out, put into practical application. But when people just go by what they see one person say and just follow that religiously, it's like, it makes it impossible to try to have any type of discussion outside of that.
Well, it's kind of like the way you started with that, where you said Phil's my coach, like almost like as a caveat, like watch what you say. Not that you're saying it that way, but you do have to say that. Where you used to not have to. You used to have open discussions and arguments, and Phil and I would go back and forth 15, 20 years ago on the forums. Where now we really can't. I mean, we kind of did a little bit, but we ended up having to take it offline, and we had a really good discussion through DMs, and we planned to do a whole video and discuss it, and which never really came to fruition. But, we had a great discussion behind the scenes, but no one else gets to see that. Where on the forum days, everyone got to see that.
Yeah. So for anybody watching who doesn't know who you are, why don't you just give us a quick background on exactly all about you? I know that I've heard this story about you doing this crazy hack squat with, what was it, Steve Cooklow, like 20 years ago? What was that? I've heard this story.
I don't remember which I did. I mean, I had a couple, like, I think, just a lot of videos. We did like 100 rep hack squat, a bunch of really good 20 rep sets. I did 500 for 16 on squat. I did 600 for 15. That was wearing briefs. I think I got 315 for 30 on bench, 225 for something like 60 on bench, all on video. A bunch of, we did Project Super Heavyweight, where I think we had 675 for maybe 5 on deadlifts. I think I did 605 for 10 on squat, 545 or 565 for 12, and then 405 for 20. That was actually an interesting thing because we filmed two weeks of workouts, but I didn't have any money, so I only had the videographer for 72 hours. So we filmed 2 weeks of workouts in 72 hours.
Wow.
So we did 2 leg days back to back, and so I did, I think, like 560, I think 605 for 10, 565 for 12, 405 for 20 on squat. Then we did, hamstrings and calves, and then we changed clothes and came back and then did 495 for 10 on front squat, more stiff leg deadlifts. It was I'm sure I was in rhabdo. That was brutal, but yeah, I guess that's where I kind of got known was, training with Steve Kuklo. How I became a coach was really, I was giving advice and talking about nutrition on the forums. I was a moderator at Anabolex, if anyone remembers that. way back. I was like in the 90s. That's where I met Skip Hill, Ken Hill, Intense Muscle. And so we've known each other for, 25 years now. And then I started getting clients. And then the 2005 Junior Nationals, I had, I think, 7 people place top 5 across all divisions and weight classes. And that kind of created my coaching business. And then working with Steve Kuklo really kind of just exploded it.
You coach Steve?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. For both his T National wins, his Motor City Classic win, and then he moved to Texas. And he worked with Art Atwood for a bit. He would still work with me kind of more like, bounce ideas off or ask something about peak week when he wasn't working with someone. But, since then he's worked with like George Farah and a number of people. But
okay. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
What I really want to talk to you today about primarily is the whole protein thing, the whole protein intake discussion. We saw you guys are going a little bit back and forth. To me, it doesn't seem like you're really advocating for low protein whatsoever.
No, and that was the whole point, and that's what Phil and I talked about in DM. Is I made no statement about. I mean, I did kind of make a statement on protein intake. I said I don't know that I don't think 600 grams a day is optimal. We don't know how much is needed. All I simply said was, let's say you gain 10 pounds of muscle in a year. That's a decent year, good year. A lot of people, Nick Walker's gained 10 pounds a year for 12 years. That's 120 pounds. You do 10 pounds a year consistently, you turn into a monster. So that's a good rate of growth. But 10 pounds of muscle a year, if you assume that muscle is 30% protein, 70% sarcoplasmic water, glycogen, yada, yada, then 10 pounds of muscle a year, if you just divide that out by 365 days, it's only 4 grams of protein synthesis per day. That's it. So if you eat 600 grams of protein and 596 grams of it does not go to build muscle, 4 grams of it does go to build muscle every day for 365 days. If you add that up, 4 grams times 365, divide by 30 to account for 70% of muscle is water, you get 10 pounds. That's all I'm saying is I'm not saying we need 4 grams. Obviously, you can't just eat 4 grams of protein and grow 10 pounds a year. I'm saying that if you say this is how much we're growing, and you take anyone, say they grew 20 pounds, whatever they grew, and say we spent a year doing that, how much did we get each day? And when you break it down, it's a very, very small amount of protein synthesis. So my argument is just throwing more protein at the problem. You can hit a bullseye on the dartboard if you throw 10,000 darts, but do we need to throw 10,000 darts? What if we're more accurate with 100 darts and make sure one of them hit? So my argument is more, I would just like a discussion on, we know protein works, high protein works, obviously. Is that the best approach? Can we, instead of doing 600 grams, can we drop it to 300 grams, be more efficient with our carbohydrate use, spike insulin levels at time where we know muscle protein synthesis will be elevated, because insulin, when it binds to the cell, it shuffles proteins around the cells and creates an influx of amino acids. So if protein synthesis is stimulated, then you have a greater influx of amino acids into that cell to actually create the muscle protein synthesis. Is IGF-1 something that we need to be looking into more directly at specific timings when muscle protein synthesis is elevated? We know MPS is elevated around each meal, and interestingly, it's almost elevated as much after each meal as it is after training. So each meal is almost like as much of a stimulus for muscle protein synthesis. I'll just say MPS for MPS as actual training. So there's all these things. It's like I know we can fill a cup of water by putting it outside in a rainstorm and dropping 10 million gallons of water on the city. We'll fill that cup of water, but we can fill it quicker and faster, more precisely under a faucet. So that's more my argument, is not that I'm anti-high protein. All my guys eat high protein. None of my guys are less than 300. Most of them are over 400 when you count incidental. Some of my bigger guys are over 500. I'm just saying that regardless of what they're eating, if they gain 10 pounds a year, they only converted 4 grams a day to new muscle.
Okay, so when you say high protein, you're giving this it's a significantly high number, but you're still it's high protein. You're still eating above 300. So what is your recommendation? Like 1.5?
I don't have grams? One. That's why I want this discussion. No one knows. My argument is, if we're only getting 4 grams a day, obviously we don't need even the 300 grams that my lowest guys would kind of be on. We don't need that much in a perfect world, because if you consider there's normal protein turnover, and we don't really know that data. I know they did some study on like marathon runners, and in a marathon they had like 50 grams of muscle breakdown that needed the protein to recover it. So if you can say that a bodybuilder needs more than that, 50% more than a marathon runner on a day they run a marathon, then that's 75 grams of protein. So you say 75 grams of protein just to prevent muscle loss. That's probably high because most Americans get way less than that, but let's say that number. So then if we do, if say we want to get 12 pounds of muscle a year, we'll do 5 grams a day. So right there, that's 80 grams a day. So like in a perfect world, if we could make sure every single gram of protein we ate was utilized perfectly, you could argue that you could get the most rapid rate of growth we get at only 80 grams of protein a day. No one's going to try that. I'm not going to risk that with my clients either. I'm going to overshoot that. But now how much do I overshoot it? And none of us really know. Some of us overshoot it way more. Some of us overshoot it less, but we're all probably recommending much more protein than we need. I would like to try to find a more optimal approach because, I think for sure, if you think of any other analogy where you just throw things at something, like I said, like throwing darts at a dartboard or a cup in a rainstorm, in every one of those analogies, there's a clear and obvious better approach, like taking a cup from a rainstorm or putting under a faucet, or having a professional dart thrower throw the dart rather than just throwing 10,000 darts at a board. So I feel like there must be a more precise way that we could be more optimal and efficient with our nutrients, but it's hard to get a discussion going.
Mm-hmm.
So when working with, let's say, a new client that comes to you, he's a competitive bodybuilder, would you rather err more on the side of starting low and seeing how much you can push their protein intake up, or would you rather see how much can they tolerate at first? And if it's too much protein, they're having digestive issues, can't eat all their food, then would you pull it down from there?
I almost always overshoot, and it's not almost because of the dogma of if you have a guy who's trying to add size and you give him less protein than he's expecting he would get, you're already gonna you're gonna lose unless he really has followed you and believes in you 100% before day one. You're gonna lose, because we're not working with robots. We're not working in a lab like with petri dishes. We're working with emotional humans.
Mm-hmm.
So if a guy pays me a lot of money to put size on him, and he was eating 400 grams of protein a day, and I put him on 200 grams, even if I remind him that Jay Cutler used to only eat 180 grams at 300 pounds of muscle, you've already lost him. So that's the other part of the problem.
So you said Jay Cutler did that. I've heard Jay say this too, but then if you look at videos that Jay's doing, like fully eating, there's plenty of days where he's eating like 16 ounces of chicken.
Yeah, he went all over the place. This was a period. This was actually in his biggest phase, probably like 2003, 2004. He went through a phase where he was doing like 1,500 grams of carbs every day. And then the protein, I'm sure, was still 300 grams or more most days, but there'd be like a day where he would do incredibly high carbs, probably 2,000 or 2,500. And then he would only eat, maybe when he went back and counted it, he was only eating like 4 ounces of meat per meal or something like that. And so we all do that. We just kind of say what our extreme, like, if you're trying to say like, I don't think you need that much protein. I only ate, and your mind goes, what was the least amount of protein I ever ate in a day? And he said, I'm sure he just said that, which was probably 180. But and he's had periods where he's eating 600 grams of protein a day.
Yeah,
and his physique, it's not like one was the clear better physique than the other.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by how you're getting these calculations as to how much protein synthesis is occurring in each day. It kind of sounds like it's more so an average, just doing an average calculation, because there's obviously no way for us to know how much is actually going on a day.
So all I'm saying is we can't know. Saying just say how much. Take any client and say how much muscle did they gain this year? If they gained 10 pounds of stage weight, you say, okay, you must have gained 10 pounds of muscle. Now, if you divide 10 pounds by 365 days, that's all I'm doing. And it's a crappy rough, but I'm just saying, like, if you spent a year trying to build muscle and you spent 365 days and you built 10 pounds of muscle over those 365 days, and you turn pounds into grams and divide that by 365, those are the numbers I'm getting.
Okay.
It's really just, all I'm saying is, like, if you had a car for 5 years and you've got 60,000 miles on it, I'm saying you divide 60,000 by 5 years and 365 days in a year, you average this many miles a day. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. But so give into the context that we're already doing things to put ourselves in the position to utilize protein as efficiently as possible. Because I think that's what we all do as bodybuilders, as coaches, anybody who's intelligent, like, programs in a way to give that outcome. It's not just like follow these macros and hit this amount of protein. We know that's obviously not going to be, I don't know. I'm sure you stand on that side as well, where it's not just about numbers, utilizing the nutrients as efficiently as
Oh,
possible.
yeah.
But say we're already doing it that way, you would still err on the side of, obviously you still err on the side of higher protein. Would you say that going closer to the 1 gram per pound of body weight, that isn't going to produce maximal gains? Because I honestly have never seen that happen.
I don't know, but I have seen it happen. I've had clients, some of my most rapid growth clients have been on people where I'll do 4 very, very high carb days a week, where we're talking like over 1,000 grams of carbs, and their protein will be, 250, maybe less. And these are guys that are around 300 pounds. Yeah.
Okay.
So what about for like a beginner? If someone's, let's say, 150 pounds, do you see an issue with someone eating only 1 gram per pound of body weight at that low of a body weight, or would you rather have them eat more?
I would probably have them have more, but it's, again, just to be safe. I don't have any data that says this is guaranteed to work better. And a large part of me thinks it's probably not working better, because even 1 pound, if we say, as someone that's smaller, they'll probably only have 50 grams of muscle protein turnover a day, and so and even if you double what the protein synthesis, and we say they're going to gain 25 pounds a year, they're still only doing 10 grams of synthesis a day. So that's 60 grams a day. So if they weigh, 180 pounds, if I put them on 180 pounds, they're already 3 times the amount of protein they need. My belief is we have a limited amount of calories. We eat too many calories, we're going to store fat. So under that calorie range that we can not gain fat on, we need to optimize the nutrients to maximize, improvements in body composition. It feels like, and I'm not going to test this because you're going to lose clients testing it, but it feels like if I put them at 1 pound of body weight, and that's 3 times the protein we assume they need, I'm already way too much protein. That allows me a lot more options of targeting carbohydrates and specific types of carbohydrates on the workout, utilizing fats to keep inflammation low, or utilizing maybe inflammatory fats like arachidonic acid during times where muscle protein synthesis is elevated. It gives all these other options. But if I double that protein intake to 360 grams, then that's 180 grams of carbs, or 80 grams of fat I'm no longer able to use for those things.
Makes sense.
So what I would see the issue with, I don't think it's an issue, it's just something that needs to be addressed, is it's not just obviously about it's about utilizing the amount of protein as efficiently as possible, but it's also when you're trying to stimulate protein synthesis, especially as you get further and further away from homeostasis, as you get bigger and bigger, like you're trying to maximize growth. It's not just about keeping muscle protein synthesis elevated, but it's trying to keep it as high as possible, as frequently throughout the day to maximize your growth potential.
Yeah, but what's stimulating the MPS? Is it the protein? Wouldn't the benefits of insulin be more likely to increase the rates of MPS than adding more protein? Does protein directly stimulate MPS? See what I'm saying? Like all the things we know, like we know insulin works, and so we're reducing our ability to utilize insulin by taking higher protein, by not having that ability to use carbohydrates. So we know certain fats like arachidonic acid or omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory, and muscle growth is an inflammatory process. Those are actually pro-MPS also. So these two macronutrients that we know promote MPS, we're reducing the amount of ability we have to utilize those for producing MPS by making sure we have too much protein for the MPS that we're already producing. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not, when I say all these things, I'm not telling anyone to eat low protein. I just want to have the discussion is like, if you really look at it, you say, what do we know actually stimulates MPS? What do we know actually stimulates increased rates of amino acid uptake into the cell? What do we know? The main macronutrients that do that are not protein.
Steroids.
Yeah. Well, that's another factor that comes in. That's a very big factor, because obviously you're going to have more ability for MPS when blood androgen levels are elevated.
So what are your thoughts on, do you think that somebody who's on exogenous androgens, super physiological levels, do they need or can they utilize higher protein to build more muscle, or because they're already signaling more muscle protein synthesis, do they not need as much protein?
They absolutely can utilize more protein, but again, we're talking if an amateur or a natural is gaining 5 pounds of muscle a year and an enhanced guy is gaining 20 pounds of muscle a year, The difference is a few grams of protein a day. That's the other thing, is when you extend it over the year, it averages out to, you know, and so like having this discussion with anyone, you know, like, because everyone's going to err on going to side with no, more protein must be the way to go, because that's what we all were taught. That's the whole industry is built around that. And I'm not arguing against high protein. Again, I'm just saying I think we're probably going further past the high mark and potentially reducing progress. And when you know, people are thinking, I'm saying like you either have to be 600 grams of protein or 60 grams of protein. I'm not saying it might be the difference between maybe lowering from 450 grams to 400 grams, which is still very high protein, but gives you 50 extra grams of carbohydrates you could utilize around training. It's like, you know, I'm just talking like, let's like the thing that gets everyone's attention is when I break down if you gain this much a year and you divide it by 365 days, you realize it's only a few grams. And then people think I'm saying that that's all you need. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that's what happens. So we're all fighting for those few grams. Can we tweak things a little bit? I'm not saying go low protein, but, you know, is higher protein always the best? And there might be times where it is. There might, you know, certain, because you get additional benefits, you know, 15 to 30% of the calories of protein gets burned up in the digestion of protein. So you get to eat more calories when you eat high protein without gaining fat. That's another benefit. So there's a lot of nuance in it. But I feel like we're probably overshooting protein more than we need to. And if we really, really nailed it perfectly, we would still be a high protein diet, but it would be slightly lower with better use of these other macronutrients to make more use of the protein we're eating.
Do you think there's even a way to nail it perfectly? Because there's obviously like you're dealing with people who have other external factors happening in their life. You know, they may be dealing with stress, just genetic variants, somebody who's just much more insulin sensitive than somebody else. How can you even know these things just by obviously like working with somebody, you get an idea, but like you have no idea what's actually really going on physiologically in their body. So it's kind of always safer to overshoot.
Yeah, you can't know, of course, but you just said like stress. What's the best macronutrient to mitigate stress? Probably fats, you know, anti-inflammatory fats. Mm-hmm. So already there, if they're a high stress person, it's like it feels like whenever any of these caveats pop up, it's like the best way to treat the caveat is not higher protein. So why do we always just go that route? And when I say we, I do the same thing, you know, and I'm still feeding my guys lots of protein.
Yeah.
So it's, you know.
Do you ever pull back on protein if you notice somebody is dealing with stress?
I do actually. I mean, probably again, just because of the dogma, I'm more pull back from carbohydrates to increase the healthy fats. And there's been many times over the years where I'm adjusting macros and changing a diet, and I'm like, man, you know, in my heart and my understanding and my science, I feel like if we just cut protein by 5 grams a meal, you know, half an ounce of meat, it would be better. But if I do that, they're going to panic. So I'll just take 5 grams of carbs from each meal and, you know, bring some extra fats in.
See, you're primarily working with guys that are already pretty huge, though.
Yeah, I mean, almost either that or I get them that way. But yeah, most of my guys are super heavies. Yeah.
It's funny because you already have these people who have that instilled in their mind. And, you know, as for myself, and I would say for Adam too, like we're younger. We're 20. I'm 25. I think Adam, you're 23, right?
23. Yeah.
Yeah. So we work with a lot of guys that are around our age that are like getting into bodybuilding and, you know, are aspiring to be that at that point, but they're all very like into the science, and you only need 1 gram. So then we'll put them like on 300 grams and then they start freaking out. This is too much. This is a waste. Yeah. And it's like, this isn't really a lot at all. Like this is pretty standard.
That's funny. Yeah. Cause I come from the Chad Nichols era of, you know, 100 grams of protein per meal, you know? Yeah. But that's a thing. Cause here's the problem with the sport. You have the 40s and 50s, bodybuilders sucked, right? Then steroids come into play. What happens? You get the 60s and 70s, Arnold, you know, bodybuilding really advances. Then you get the 80s, higher doses. Bodybuilding really kind of starts to accelerate. What do you get in the 90s? Early 90s, you get GH brought in. 93, Dorian Yates comes out. You get the 96 Olympia was the first big insulin Olympia. Insulin comes into play. Physiques explode. What have we had since then? You know, guys still argue that the late 90s, early 2000s were the best bodybuilders. Have we, you know, look at the 60s, 70s versus 80s versus every decade of substantial improvement, and then now nothing for 20 years. You know, peptides came out, but they didn't do it. They didn't advance the sport dramatically. So why are, even if we believe the old way with nutrition is the best way, why are we not, we've stagnated. Why are we not trying new things, Yet we know high protein, GH, insulin, and anabolics maxes out with what you had with guys in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's what, and guys today, that's what you get. And we haven't improved. Maybe that's as good as it gets. But in no other sport, no other industry, no other technology, no other anything has there not been progress. The Olympics are better than they were 25 years ago. Basketball is better. Football is different, but better. Every other sport, pitch 100-mile-an-hour pitcher was rare 25 years ago. You got high schoolers throwing 100 miles an hour now. So like it's like, as someone who's supposed to like advance the sport and be an educator in the sport, I feel like we're doing a disservice because at least not exploring new ideas, because we know what works to get the look we have and we have had for the last 25 years. We don't know if that's the peak, but I don't feel like it should be.
Yeah. Do you think we are going backwards?
Yeah. And I think partly, yeah, in ways. And I think and I think Phil might have this belief also. I think partly the problem is the cost of GH. I think GH was probably most optimal when used around like the 4 IU per day range. Because I think we have to get guys so much leaner than you used to. And I think it's because everyone's skin's so thick, because everyone can afford 10 IUs of growth now in prep. It used to like, God, I have to get like when I do, because I know what the check-ins look like compared to what they look like on stage, and you always look thicker skinned on stage. And it used to be like you could trust the check-in photos that was what they were going to look like on stage. Now you can't, because everyone's skin's so thick. They'll look great in hotel lighting, and they get on stage and there's nothing. So you have to get guys like just so much harder than you used to. And I feel like everyone's body fat's lower, but people don't look better on stage. And I think a large part of that is the thick skin from the higher GH use.
Yeah. Yeah. He always talks to me about that. I don't use it at all. Well, I'm also allergic to it, but that's one of the reasons why he wouldn't let me use it, is because of
I agree with him on that 100%. I mean, it has great value, but I think it has great value in when bodybuilding peaked, which was, 2, 4 IUs, maybe 6 IUs for a short period of time, where now everyone's 10 or 15. It's like guys are like, just drinking it.
Yeah. I have a question for you that I get asked this a lot is people always ask, why can't you just drink amino acids all throughout the day and get the same effect as you would from actually being able to eating protein? Why can't I just have a shit ton of amino acids?
You probably could, but I mean, you have to have a mix of all the amino acids, and especially essential amino acids. But you're going to do that for a day or a week or a month, maybe a couple months. It takes 20 years to reach your peak in the sport. Are you going to do that for 2 decades? It's like the guys that say they'll force feed. It's like, yeah, everyone will force feed today because you're motivated to get big. Come back to me after 6 months of force feeding when you can't even open your refrigerator without gagging and tell me now we're going to add even more food. You know? So I think, I mean, arguably you could, but I don't. Again, because we're not robots, you're dealing with the fact that you're like a human wants some flavor. And I don't know if anyone here has eaten a steak, but they're really good, way better than an amino acid drink.
Yeah. Do you utilize the essential amino acids at all?
Yeah, around training. Yeah, during training primarily. Yeah.
Why do you use them during training?
And this is another one that I wholeheartedly believe that proper nutrients, because that's when MPS is elevated other than around a meal, is around training. And so we want to make sure that we need the essential amino acids. You need all 20 amino acids at the site of MPS, but if you don't have the essential amino acids recently in the diet, MPS can occur. So I want to just guarantee that there's more than enough essential amino acids at the time we're most likely to have MPS elevated, which is around training. And then I also want some carbohydrates that are easy to digest, like a high molecular weight carbohydrate. Or if you're dieting, you don't really need that when gastric emptying is really high. But I say that, and I'd use that, but I'll also give the caveat that has any Mr. Olympia had essential amino acids during training? Ronnie never drank an intra-workout. Jay never drank an intra-workout. Phil never drank an intra-workout. Dorian never drank an intra-workout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's more just like the small little 1% things of like what can you do, but it's not growth hormone. And
I believe it does give you that 1%, but that's another thing when you actually do the math. It's like, okay, Ronnie's biggest stage was like 297, or whatever, 303. So say 303 because that's perfect, because 1% less of 303 would be 300 pounds.
Yeah.
So does Ronnie look different at 300 pounds than he did at 303? Yeah, probably not.
No,
but but we all want every percent we can get.
Yeah, I think it's hard to really compare to those guys because we're also comparing to the top of the genetic like the top elite guys. Like, look at fucking what Phil looked like before he even competed. It's absolutely insane.
No, I did the 2005 Junior Nationals with Phil, and we talked to him, and we at the athletes meeting, and the guy knew nothing about the sport, and he was sitting there. We all knew he won the overall, and he was going to win the USA in 6 weeks, and he didn't know anything about dieting, about training, about gear, and it was like, this guy. This was me when I was 14, as far as knowledge, and he's going to turn pro in 6 weeks.
It's insane. So it's like what those guys do. I feel like there's obviously you got to like look at what the best are doing, but there's just these scenarios where we can't really go off of that. I think more so looking at the average, just IFBB pro in general, but none of these guys. There's just so many variables at play. It's hard to really,
Yeah, my problem with the genetics thing too is when everyone, like, if you bring up what Ronnie did this, everyone's like, yeah, well, he's Ronnie. It's like, well, yeah, but how are we going to, like, I remember from The Simpsons, there was an episode where Bart got put in remedial classes, and he goes in and he goes, let me get this straight. We're supposed to catch up to the other students by learning slower than them. And that's what I feel like. It's like, yeah, they have better genetics, but like, so we're going to be better than them by doing things differently than them. Like that's another thing that, it's just because they have good genetics doesn't mean like we got to do things totally different than them. It's like, like LeBron James would smoke me in basketball, but that doesn't mean I should, if I want to be a good basketball player, I should practice entirely different than him. There's, I can't do some of the things he can do, but I should maybe look at some level of, is there anything in what he's done with his training and practice? Probably not. But
okay, so let's talk about how you're going about getting the most out of this protein utilization. I know you're big on carb cycling, right? So how do you typically implement that into a bulking phase?
So carb cycling is kind of less important for bulking. I think it's really more important for fat loss. But the way I'll do it typically is I'll just take kind of what the average person will be, that we're really trying to put size on them. We'll have 3 different days. They'll have a low day, which is when any day they don't train. And the carbs will be, not low because we're trying to gain calories are high, but protein's pretty high, probably the same as it would be on a medium day. Carbs are lower and fats are going to be higher. We want anti-inflammatory fats higher. We want to make sure they're recovering. They're not training that day. They don't need a ton of carbs. And we possibly want them very, very slightly hypocaloric, kind of to stimulate appetite. We know there's enough protein and healthy fats that they're not going to lose muscle. You're not going to lose muscle anyways, but and calories are around baseline, maybe slightly below it to stimulate hunger. Then our medium days will be probably the same protein as low days, maybe slightly lower, but typically the same as low days. Fats will be moderate, but not quite as high as low day, and carbs will be higher. And then carbs are especially higher around training. So my carbs will always be highest around training. Then the next highest will be early in the morning typically, and it'll kind of fade throughout the day. Or it'll be pretty level, but if there's any spike, it'll be around training. And then the high days will typically have 2 a day in the off season. Some of my bigger guys will get to 3 or maybe even 4, but carbs will be very high. So protein will be maybe, like, if they have 6 meals, usually I do about 10 grams less per meal. So 60 grams less per day, maybe a little more than that, maybe 15 grams less per meal. So it'll be, that'd be like 90 grams less a day. But then carbs are very, very high. And I really push carbs, where a lot of my guys are over 1,000 grams on high days, quite a bit of them, but almost no one is under 750. I don't know that anyone's under 650. Even a guy that's like 145 pounds is probably that high, probably. But most guys are like 800 to 900. My bigger guys will get over 900. My really big guys will be over 1,000. And we really push that, and that'll be the day we use insulin also.
So for a guy who's higher in body fat, but still making progress, getting stronger, decent pumps, decent appetite, but body fat is, higher, are you still implementing those extremely high carb days because they're not as insulin sensitive?
Yes, or I'll get them less fat, because you just reach a point, because the weird thing is, like, body fat aids strength. And so guys will get fatter and keep getting stronger, and they think they're gaining muscle, but you're really not. And there's a reason pros always look like pros and primo bulkers never look like pros, and it's body fat. When body fat gets elevated, all your mechanisms for growth are blunted. Your insulin sensitivity goes down. You aromatize more testosterone to estrogen. You produce less testosterone if you're natural. If you're on stuff, it doesn't really matter. But either way, you're aromatizing more. And so typically if someone's body fat is high and they want to add size, I'll let them know, like the cold hard facts are, if you want to be bigger in 9 months, we have to diet now. If you want to be bigger in 6 weeks, we'll keep growing, but in 9 months, you're not going to be bigger than you could be if we just diet. The best way to get big at any extended future date is almost always get really lean right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically that's what I'll recommend, is getting lean enough to actually have a proper off season.
That's why the rebound is so effective after a show.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like the guy, and we were like the eat big to get big, like mantra that was my generation's like life force, has ruined so many careers because so many permabulkers sit at 250 pounds for year after year after year, but refuse to diet down because they're going to have to diet down to 185 before they're actually shredded, and they don't want to do it. But if they did diet down to 185 once, that 250 off season is no longer there. That 250 off season gets hit in 6 weeks, and then they're 265, and then they diet down to 200. Then the next year they're 275, they diet down to 220. Then the next year they're 280, and they diet down to 240. Each time you're leaner at your peak, and your shredded weight is higher, and that's why guys only really become bodybuilders once they start competing, because they do that first diet, and that's their first real off season where they make progress like a beginner again.
Yeah. Would you say the level of importance for this changes as you are more advanced? Because like I said, like we both deal with guys who are younger getting into it, and I'll always try to keep them as lean as possible to just prime sensitivity, put them in the best position for growth. But obviously, when you have a ton of muscle mass and you look leaner, it's a lot easier to maintain that composition compared to when you don't have a ton of tissue. It's kind of like they almost need to be in that. Some of them, just depending on genetics, kind of need to look like a permabulker for a bit just to put on that mass initially and cut back, even if that takes a couple of years.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And that's kind of what I was saying with my weight extremes are so, wild. Because, like I would say, like a guy will go 250 and he'll diet all the way to 185. Then the next year he'll be 265, but diet down to, 200. So he gains 15 pounds, but his bottom weight is 25 pounds heavier or whatever. I did the math wrong. But yeah, you just kind of have to, because you just don't have much leeway, and their metabolism isn't high when they don't have a lot of muscle. When you got a guy who's 300 pounds lean, they don't get fat. It's hard to just get enough food in them, period, let alone enough. They don't eat enough food to get fat. Even if they eat junk, they have to be really working to get really fat. But there's other things, as you go. I always say there's like two bodybuildings. Bodybuilding 1 is where 99% of bodybuilders never leave. And that's trying to gain size, probably getting a little too fat in the off season. And then contest prep is basically just starving, and it's miserable. And you're starving. That's where most people never get past that. Then second bodybuilding is where you're carrying so much muscle that prep stops being about starving and more being about just being precise with your diet. We're talking guys who are 250 plus on stage. They don't get fat in the off season because they're huge, and they don't have to starve because they're huge. And then even worse, you start getting that big, and off season is no longer about just getting as big as possible, because health issues become, when you're 320 pounds, there's a lot more health issues, a lot more blood pressure problems, a lot more concerns about taking time off, doing TRT, and so the goal is, and the other thing that kind of comes with that is, if you've noticed, guys, because growth, where am I at? Growth goes like this, but it doesn't do that forever. We don't have 500-pound bodybuilders. You get to around that 300-pound mark off season, and just people don't get much past that, but their look continues to change. Because I know the first off season that I was 280 was completely different than my last off season at 280, even at similar body fats. You start getting like this 3-dimensional look, that really bodybuilder look. It's like you go through the phase where you add a lot of scale weight, and that lasts for years and years and years. But pretty soon you're a top level super heavyweight national bodybuilder or a pro bodybuilder, and your scale weight isn't jumping up every year, but your look keeps improving. Like the roundness keeps improving, the 3-dimensionality of the look keeps improving. And so there's a lot of things, different about high-end bodybuilding versus beginning bodybuilding. And that's actually a really good point, because most of the time when you talk, we just talk like one thing, and like I say, don't let a guy get fat. Well, if a guy's 180 pounds trying to get to 250 pounds, he's not going to get there without getting a little too fat at some point. But, and so that's a totally different thing than me telling a 320-pound bodybuilder off season who competes at 280 not to get fat. It's impossible for him to get fat.
So at what point do you generally pull back and do either a mini cut or a full cut, depending on, the type of athlete that it is?
Well, when you're dieting and you can tell when you're watery or not watery, in prep, you can always tell I'm watery today, I'm less.
Mhm.
If you can't tell that in the off season, in my opinion, you're too fat. I don't know what that is, 12%, faint outline or abs. But if you are so fat you can't tell when you're holding more water or less water from one day to the next, there's too much body fat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you look at also their ability to eat food and their appetite? So if they're still able to, get all their food in and have good pumps in the gym,
Yeah,
but
good point. Yeah, and if they're doing that, then we're going to look at things like insulin sensitivity. What does their
Mhm.
blood work show for A1C? What
Mhm.
is their fasting glucose? And sure, if fasting glucose is 80 and their A1C is 5.0, and
Right.
they're maybe a percentage or two over what I would normally recommend, I'm going to say, let's ride this out. Your appetite's good, your insulin sensitivity is high. Why waste this?
Right.
But,
So it's not always just based on how they look. I mean, obviously it can be,
mhm,
but
mhm.
those factors also matter
Yeah,
as
I
well.
guess how they look is kind of more like an easy representation of whether or not they're
Mhm.
anabolic, But
Mhm.
if they look like they shouldn't be, but all other markers show that they're still highly anabolic, then I'm not going to tell them to stop being anabolic.
Yeah.
Mhm. You said you were using insulin on those higher carb days.
Mhm.
So you're just are you only using short acting insulin
Yeah,
throughout off season? You're not a fan of using
no,
Atlantis.
no. I think we're going to have a big problem with insulin sensitivity and
Uh-huh.
diabetes in 15 years from because the problem is people don't, and I mean, not that people don't, a lot of the people using it, the coaches understand, but like, yes, your blood sugar is good and your fasted glucose is good and your A1C is good when you're using Lantus because you're supplying insulin. That's like an alcoholic saying, well, I don't have the DTs when I drink a beer. I don't go through withdrawals when I have drinks. Yeah, because you're still supplying the insulin beats it. So you have your body produces insulin or you take insulin and it binds to the receptor. Each time it binds a receptor, those receptors get desensitized to it. It's like the first time you see your wife, she's gorgeous, but after 20 years, you're like, yeah, she's still good, but but it's like drinking, the first time you drink, you have 3 beers and you're hammered, if you're an alcoholic, you need 3 beers just to not shake, so the receptors get desensitized. And so if that means that your blood sugar is going to start elevating, well, if the way to get your blood sugar back down is to throw even more insulin and desensitize this receptors even more, yes, in the short term, it improves your blood sugar, but it's not improving insulin sensitivity. So I'll
Mhm.
try to give the quick overview. Uh, where I kind of started the idea of I'll have people used to use insulin around training, either pre or post or pre and post. Let's say post, and if you take Humalog, I'll just take one example. There's obviously, like everything, there's so much nuance. But we take one example. A guy uses Humalog post workout 5 days a week. You get about 3 hours of super physiological levels of Humalog of insulin after each use. So that's 15 hours for a week, right? So I thought, well, it doesn't only last 3 hours. It's just really 3 hours before it dips low enough that you're not really super physiological to be getting a benefit. So I thought, well, if we take Humalog 3 times a day, we can really get like 18 hours in one day from 3 doses. So that means then I rather than using insulin 5 days a week, getting a negative effect insulin sensitivity 5 days a week, and for 15 hours of increased growth rates, I can use it one day a week and get 18 hours of growth rate. And so that's kind of where it started from. And the reason I like Humalog is just the precision.
Mhm.
Human R works just fine. The reason I don't like Lantus is because of the long duration. It's a band-aid that
Mhm.
improves blood sugar without improving insulin sensitivity.
Mhm.
Okay. When you do those higher carb days, are you doing them specifically around days that are more energy expending, like leg days, or would you do it? Would you also do it around a weaker body part too?
Both. Priority one is going to be a higher workload training day, like a leg or back day. And most people never get past that because most people never get past like 2 a week, and that's going to be priority one because we want a need for those calories. If we get a third day and you have a glaring weak point, then we would put it on like a weak body part.
Okay.
If
But I don't
somebody's
think the rate of growth is that elevated because I think you really get systemic growth. Just because we trained a muscle that day doesn't mean that's the only thing that grew that day.
Mhm.
So I want to make sure we have a high workload so we can get the most calories in you. So like, yeah, because everyone's like, oh, my arms are weak. I want, because everyone wants big arms. Yeah, it would be fun to eat a high carb day on arm day, but you're burning 400 less calories or 600 less calories in training. That's 600 less calories we get to eat, which kind of starts to negate the whole effect of the high day.
So if somebody's putting on too much body fat too quickly, will you decrease the amount of high days, increase the amount of low days? Is that kind of how you'll
Yeah.
structure their schedule?
Dropping. I mean, I hate to do that because if we get to that point, it's a fault. by me as the coach, they shouldn't be gaining that much fat.
Mhm.
But if that were like in the case that happened, the first thing would be lowering low days, because we're not training that day.
Mhm.
We don't need the extra calories. If we're a little hypocaloric and burn some fat that day, great, as long as we can still supply the nutrients on training days. If that doesn't work, it would be dropping a high day. But typically, I won't go through all that. If we're gaining fat, we need to fix the problem, and then we need to diet down.
Do you use metformin at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's another one of those nuanced things, because metformin is anti-hypertrophy. But so is Advil. And power lifters and bodybuilders take Advil. I always use the analogy, like I say, it's like a deck chair on the Titanic. Like, yes, metformin is anti-hypertrophy. It's anti-inflammatory. The CIMP pathway is kind of anti-hypertrophy, but if you're on gear, it's such a minor effect. I always say it's like taking a deck chair off the Titanic and saying, there, it weighs less. Yes, it technically does, but it still weighs 300,000 tons. One 3-pound deck chair doesn't really make a difference. So yeah, I use it, and then at the end of the day, even if it is counter to hypertrophy, it's better to have good insulin sensitivity. You're not going to grow at all if your insulin sensitivity is trash.
So you keep it as a staple, or is it just circumstantial?
Use circumstantial. Yeah, I prefer berberine.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah,
as a baseline. Yeah, as a first. Yeah, just because you don't have to. Not that anyone uses a script to get metformin. It's easy to find, but berberine's just easier to buy, and it's it works pretty similarly. It has a similar effect with CIMP, but it also has a cascade reaction through IGF-1, which isn't counter to hypertrophy. So I think it's less counter to hypertrophy than metformin is. And I think 1,500 milligrams of berberine a day spread evenly throughout the day is roughly equivalent to probably like 850, 1,000 milligrams of metformin in most people, and not close enough so that, it's a good first line defense. Anyways.
So what determines the switch from, if you want to go from berberine to metformin? Just lab work?
Usually don't switch. Usually add. Yeah, if you're on berberine and insulin sensitivity is still getting beat down and your A1C is elevating, then we'll add metformin. And that's another weird. Since 2020, I've seen like an absolute skyrocket in like adult onset type 1, or not really type 1, like type 1B or whatever, where there is some reduction in insulin production, and you never saw that. You never saw that until the last 4 years. But I've had 3 or 4 clients who blood sugar started elevating. They go through testing, and it turns out they're not producing enough insulin, and but they're not full type 1 diabetics. And it's a weird thing that I just never saw until the last 4 or 5 years. But I'm seeing fairly regularly now. I mean, like once a year at least.
So at that point, would you start to implement Lantus at that point once they start losing beta cell function?
Well, at that point, yeah. But I would prefer that ideally, I would prefer they get an insulin pump. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because then you can then you can have a trickle bolus that goes throughout the day, and you can have a set amount that boluses per how many grams of carbs you eat in each meal, and then you have like almost pancreatic control over it.
How do you even get an insulin pump if you're not diagnosed as diabetic?
You would need to be diagnosed.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. I've never had it, but I've had. I can't remember if it's 3 or 4. I'm trying to think of the 4th person. I felt like I've had at least 3 people diagnosed as pancreatic insufficiency to where they were diagnosed or they were prescribed insulin and eventually an insulin pump.
So when you're looking at pancreatic insufficiency, are you looking at just on blood work, just insulin production, or are you also looking at C-peptide or both?
On that, I'm not going to that. Like for me, I'll recommend. I'll see stuff like that, and I'll say, look, I'm not a physician. I can't prescribe these things, but this is what I think is happening. I would then at that point, I'm going to say you need to get a referral to an endocrinologist, because if that's really what's going on, we can treat pancreatic insufficiency by like eyeballing insulin and recommending adjustments. But like you're going to trickle to full blown type 1 diabetes where your pancreas isn't working, and we're not going to be doing that. We shouldn't be doing that. That needs to be under medical care where like because a pump is just so like. I hate to recommend it because bodybuilders would use anything you recommend, but I mean, if you run into that case, it's you have like pancreatic level control where you can control a basal dose and then an exact amount per grams of carbs you eat in each meal, and eventually you can get a continuous glucose monitor, and that can even adjust your basal levels based on what the continuous glucose monitor is reading, and then you can really get precise with it.
Yeah. I've seen this in a few guys in their mid-20s. They're not huge bodybuilders or anything, but exactly what you're talking about. I wonder, can Merrick prescribe this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, believe Merrick can prescribe it. So, and I guess I don't know that
The
they
continuous
do,
pump.
I don't know. I would think I would assume they're going to refer you to an endocrinologist because there's just, that's what they specialize in, and you just run the risk of medical malpractice like so high when you're doing something a specialist typically handles and you're not a specialist.
Okay. Yeah.
But my brother-in-law actually got diagnosed with type 1 at age 40. Also, yeah, and he's not not a bodybuilder at all. But so it's a weird thing that I don't know if it's COVID related. I don't know, but it's something that certainly like I never saw before COVID. And
I did an episode with Jason Poston. You know who that is?
I know the name. Yeah, I don't know. I never met him, but
he was a top Olympian in men's physique years ago when it was the division. And he told me he was type 1 diabetic, but he didn't get diagnosed until he was in his mid-20s too.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, but that was back before the. Yeah. That's still interesting though. Yeah, because my daughter was diagnosed at 5, my niece at 2. But just type 1 diabetes in general was when I was a kid, I went through all 12 years of like grade school, and I knew one diabetic. Her name was Diana. She was at our school for like 2 years. That was it. I don't know that my daughter has ever been the only type 1 in her grade any year.
Yeah,
it's
interesting,
crazy how much has exploded.
Yeah, he had some interesting theories behind why it was happening, because I always assumed it was just something that you get diagnosed with, like just genetically when you're very young. But now we see the guys getting it when they're older. It was like he's like maybe it's from microplastics. I have no idea, but it was just.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem is like you say anything like that and you get like counter conspiracy theorists, but something happened that used to not be diagnosed, and it's part of the whole list of autoimmune diseases that were very autoimmune illnesses were very rare 25 and especially 50 years ago, and they're much less rare now. How many celiac people did you know growing up? Yeah. I didn't know any. I have celiac, and it's an autoimmune, sarcoidosis. I didn't even know what I remember doing a project on that in college. I had no idea what that was. It's an autoimmune disease. I see it all the time. Colitis. What's the other gut one?
Diverticulitis.
Head. What's that?
Diverticulitis.
Diverticulitis. See that? Do you see that? I mean, I think the first 10 years as a coach, I didn't have a single client with diverticulitis. It's all over, So there's a whole list, a weird thing where the whole autoimmune world has kind of exploded. And type 1 diabetes is generally kind of viewed that way, where the body decides that the beta cells of the islets, the Langerhans, and the pancreas are something that needs to be attacked, And for me, for celiac, my body sees the wheat protein and decides it's something that needs to be attacked,
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. It's my punishment for making fun of people with it's like special food requests for my whole life. And I got the worst one. I got the glutens.
Yeah. So before last thing I want to touch on here is how you approach the fat intake, and does that differ between an enhanced and natural athlete?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does differ. It's going to be lower for an enhanced because they don't need the fats for hormone production. It's not going to be. It's not like night and day, but like I'm just going to be less cautious about lowering fats in a diet, and I'm going to, with someone who's natural, I'm going to be more cognizant of what their fat intake is. But it's maybe a 10% difference. But sorry, what was the actual question? I'm totally.
Like, how do you approach it? Is there a minimum that you like to keep in just for hormone production?
Not very much. No, I'm a lower fat guy, but I mean, I typically rarely have meals without added fat. And so I use a food list with a relatively low fat protein source. I have like basically use freely sources, and I've used sparingly sources. And my use freely will be like the highest fat would be like pretty lean, like a 96 4-ground beef or like a round steak or maybe flank steak. But even when you get to like 93.7, I already call that like use sparingly, meaning like if you use that, we might not add fat in that meal. But then I typically always add at least 7 grams of fat in a meal. And the reason I pick 7 grams is because half a tablespoon of oil is 7 grams. An eighth of a cup of
Yeah, it's
nuts are
easy.
about 7 grams. A tablespoon of peanut butter. So it's just an easy run, like 7, 10, 14, because 10 is typically half an avocado. So, like if you're working with like a guy who wants to be a pro bodybuilder, he's going to weigh his avocado out. If you're working with like a general person, you can say 10 grams and just have him cut an avocado in half and be close enough for funk, So like, but that's kind of where I do those fats. So everyone's like 7, 10, 14 grams per meal.
Will you ever push fats up in a bulking phase? Because I know you'll push carbs up, but do you ever push fats up?
Not really. No. I mean, not unless someone has an incredibly high metabolism.
Mhm.
Fats would be my last thing. I mean, I never really go below a certain amount, but I don't really push them. Fats would be kind of in proportion. Like my low day meals will kind of follow a pattern. It'll be like maybe 40 grams, like a real small guy will eat 40 grams of protein per meal, 35 grams of carbs, like 10 grams of fat. Well, a bigger guy might be 50 grams of protein, 50 grams carbs, 10 grams of fat. Like when you start getting like a heavyweight competitor or super heavy, maybe 60 grams of protein, maybe 60 grams of carbs and 14 grams of fat. A really big guy, like 70 grams of protein, 75 grams of carbs and 14 grams of fat. But it's always kind of between like 7 and 14 grams in the fat.
You're saying
From your really small guy to your really huge guy.
you're saying like at least 50 grams in a day.
Oh, that's per meal.
No, across the day, like you're still.
Oh
like,
yeah,
at least 50 grams a day.
Yeah. I mean, especially when that's because I'm talking added fat. When you count the incidentals that are in the protein and the carbs, for sure, yeah. And it's hard to get below that. And I come from the 60 was it 60 30 10 days. The Flex magazine of the mid 90s was a super low fat. They would recommend 10% fat, which is like impossible to get, unless you're eating cod, and tilapia and rice. Even that, even lean sources of meat are like usually more than 10% fat. And so it's funny that people used to say it, but yeah, I come from that. That was where I just kind of like cut my teeth on. So I've never been really a high fat guy.
Okay. Now, are there any issues you run into that somebody can run into when they're doing a prep, especially as the natural, if they reduce fats too much?
Oh yeah, I mean they'll feel miserable. Their testosterone production will plummet. Their skin will dry out. Their hair will be crap. Yeah, so and that's probably why prepping as a natural is hard. You just don't have as much wiggle room because you got like I can take enhanced guys to zero fat, just what's in the super lean protein source. And a lot of times you do that. Like late in the diet, you might have them eat only lean protein and no added fat, and they'll be fine. I mean, they'll be miserable, but they're not going to waste away. They're not, But a natural guy, you don't have that leeway, and so they don't have the metabolism, and they need higher amounts of the highest caloric macro there is. So it's hard to prep as a natty.
Yeah. So say there's a natural who's behind on a show or whatever, they are they have to meet a certain deadline. Would you rather pull protein down lower or pull fats down? If they're already, let's say, 30-40 grams of fat, would you continue to pull that or bring down the protein?
Pull fats, yeah, and so again, I'm not a low protein guy, and the reasoning for that would be that because you have to pull a higher percentage of fats. You have to pull a higher percentage of I'll just say it the way protein. 15 to 30% of the calories in protein get burned. Just digesting the protein. Fats are almost 100% of the calories are absorbed. So 100 calories of fats is 100 calories. 100 calories of fats might only be 75 calories or 80 calories by the time it's fully digested, So that's why. And I'll just say like, yeah, your life's going to suck. Your skin's going to be terrible. You're going to have no energy. Your joints are going to hurt. But if we pull this many calories, from protein, we have to pull even more calories.
Okay. Yeah.
Makes sense because of the thermic effect of food.
Yeah.
It's
because you think what
thermogenic.
happens. I mean, it makes sense. You have protein. It breaks down to di and tripeptide amino acids, and that's what gets absorbed. And those amino acids can be used for something or not. Well, if they're not used, they have to be converted to something, the gluconeogenesis.
Mhm.
Well, anytime you convert anything, if I build something, it takes energy. The body has to turn those amino acids into glucose. So the body has to use energy by, moving them around. And so that's where the calorie burn comes from.
Mhm.
And then again, if they're not used as a carbohydrate and it goes through the fatty acid synthesis pathway, again, the body has to come in and turn that glucose into a fatty acid, and it takes energy to do that. Where fats, they don't reverse. Fats can't turn into protein. Fats are either used as fats or stored as fats, and so there's no thermic effect.
Yeah, so fats are significantly easier to store than protein and
Yeah,
carbohydrates.
yeah. I mean, 30% more, you could argue, like at their peak, because by the time protein has gone all the way to the fatty acid synthesis pathway, it's gone through gluconeogenesis and the fatty acid synthesis pathway. So you can argue at least 15% of the calories have been used through that process by the time they're stored as fat. So, like as far as fat storage, protein, has a long way to go before it gets stored as fat, and a lot of calories get burned on the way to that, where fat gets stored as fat. If you eat 100 calories of fat and you only burn 90 calories, you store 10 grams. That's it, or 10 calories.
Yeah, it just comes back to the same thing that we're always trying to really put it. What is the word I'm looking for? Like ingrained into people's heads, because this younger generation, they're all just very stuck on the surface level aspect of dieting, where it's just calories in, calories out, macros this, macros that. We'll just titrate up the bulk. There's more fats, more calories. It's like not all calories are created equally. It's like that's not going to contribute necessarily to more growth. You see guys like putting avocado oil in their protein shakes. Like, got to get my calories in. It's like, this is ineffective.
Yeah, and that's a perfect statement, because that's where the core of my protein topic is because you're saying that's not the optimal way. Obviously, there's got to be a better way than just pouring fat on to get the calories in. We know there's better use of those calories, and that's kind of what I'm saying with, But yeah, the calories in versus calories out thing is really frustrating too, because that's not a nutrition question. It's not. A calorie is a unit of energy. That's just energy in is energy out, and that's a fundamental there's a certain amount of energy in the universe, and that's it. We don't create it. If we could, that would be great, because we wouldn't depend on big oil or the electricity companies. We just snap our fingers and create energy, and so that holds true. But then what people miss is the nuance of, yes, calories in versus calories out, but that says nothing about how many calories you burn, what your metabolic rate is, what your NEAT level is, and it says nothing about the thermic effect of the food of the calories you did eat. And that's where people get lost, and that where people will think that calories in versus calories out doesn't hold, because it always holds. If it didn't hold, then go to Switzerland and present your findings to the Nobel whatever, because you're guaranteed a Nobel Prize, and you're also the world's first trillionaire because you solved the energy crisis. But that holds, but it's not as simple as that, because all food is not created equal as far as calories, and all calorie expenditure is not created equal. All metabolisms aren't equal.
Yeah, it's just something we're always trying to put into their heads, and it's like talking to a wall sometimes. It seems almost impossible.
Yeah, and it's I love the focus on science and research that the sport is getting, because it used to be so bro heavy, for years, and we need. But the problem is that most people aren't smart enough to understand, because the science isn't surface level, And so, yeah, calories in versus calories out is the law, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of what is actually going on with metabolic processes, And so it's great that that science is in the sport, but the researchers understand the science. John Smith, who's in 11th grade and read one post on Instagram, doesn't understand the science.
Yeah, that's another point that we try to make, is because when you see the actual researchers talk about these things, they'll understand the nuance and say, like, it's not that black and white. They'll expand on these things, but then the people will read like one abstract from a study and take that as it's black and white. Okay, you just need to be in a surplus to build muscle. That's it. Like, why would I be hypocaloric on my off days? I'm going to lose muscle. It's just, there's no actual deeper understanding of that, but we don't have the literature to say exactly what we're trying to say here to present to them.
It's doubly bad, because I always joke, no one reads the research. And I've done this before, just to be a dick. I've posted a link to research studies backing my claims that have nothing to do with my claim, because I know no one will read the articles, because reading research papers is boring. So no one reads them. So one person reads them, probably misinterprets it, makes a post about it, and then 100,000 people see that, and that's what they believe the research article said. And no one goes to, because if you ever go back and actually read the research, because my protein topic would be a perfect example of that. My protein topic would be, hey, we followed this group of people, and they gained this amount of muscle per year, and we saw that the maximum amount of muscle protein synthesis per day was 4 grams per day. And someone would read that and be like, well, this article says you only need 4 grams of protein a day. And then 100,000 people would see that and think that's what the article said, when that's not what it says at all.
Yeah, they're just regurgitating. They're not actually understanding the science of what else does protein do in the body. It's going to help build up, all these other tissues as well, not just muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing with the research is like it's limited. You're working with humans. You can't follow someone for 10 years and every meal and expect them to track every meal they eat according to your research study. So you get short bits of time, short bits of data, and you have to like really focus on one thing. Like if we're tracking weight loss, you have to like normalize for all these things and then change one variable, and like that gives you some information, but that's a very, very small bit of information. It's like when we had all these people eat this much protein, this much carbs, and then we had one group eat this much fat, one group they eat this much fat, and here's what their energy expenditure was. It's like, yeah, that gives us some information, but that's very limited. Like you would assume that the people who had more fat probably burned more calories throughout the day because they had more food energy. The people who ate less fat probably burned less calories. But that doesn't mean anything about whether they lost weight, gained weight, what their body composition was. And so,
Yeah.
research is needed, but it's very precise because that's what it has to do.
Yeah, it's not really done on not really done on bodybuilders who are training hard, and if they're measuring their protein intake of 0.8 grams per kilogram as being the necessary amount, it's not applicable to a 250, 300 pound bodybuilder who's training harder than any of the subjects in the study.
The other problem with research, I always hated this, is because of bro science, most exercise physiology, most nutrition scientists want to prove bro science wrong. And I remember that the reason I know that 50 grams of protein turnover for a marathon runner, the reason that's so ingrained in my head is because of a professor who was an endurance runner that I had in college, who was always intent on proving to me that I didn't need to eat as much protein as I thought I needed to eat, and it's because which I was probably true because I'm sure I thought I probably did, that's my argument today is kind of what his argument is to some extent, but that's the other problem is like researchers hate the bro science so much that they almost want to prove it wrong rather than find out if there's any value in it, which there is.
Yeah, I would say bro science pioneered a lot of things that we
sure.
do. And it does seem like a lot of people just want to be on that opposite end of the spectrum to seem more intelligent and be like, this is literature based. I have science. You don't have this. You only have, the entire IFBB population to support that this works. We don't have this paper. And I remember somebody quoted me a paper not that long ago, and I was talking about meal timing, protein frequency. And there's this piece of paper on, maybe you've seen it, where they compare, eating 3 to 4 meals a day or something, and how it elevates muscle protein synthesis and how nutrient timing really isn't that important. But then you actually look at the paper, it's like, okay, well, you ate a larger amount of protein in one sitting, but how much of that is actually assimilated? Well, more of it gets assimilated to an extent, but then it's elevated, but it's not at the peak, right? The point is to keep it as high as possible. So we want to keep repeating that process. And people can't understand that context. It's like, oh, if I eat 200 grams in one sitting, it's not gonna be any difference. Like that's not true, because you could keep it as high to that mark as you can by continuously stimulating that.
And the length of time of the study is important too. And I'll give like an example on that. If you studied insulin for 12 weeks, you would find no anabolic benefit. And I'll say why, because if you measured by progress, by scale progress, or like by EMG analysis or whatever, or muscle biopsy, because like if we say to get, 10 pounds of muscle a day was like 4 pounds of amino acid muscle protein synthesis a day, right? So that hardly any. Well, let's say you add insulin and you increase your growth rate by 20%, right? So 2 more pounds a year, which over 10 years, that's 20 pounds. Over 20 years, that's 40 pounds. So that's the difference between being an amateur or winning pro shows. So that's a huge difference maker. If you take a guy who's 18 and give him 2 extra grams a day for 20 years, when he's 38, he's 40 pounds of muscle difference. So that's a big. But if you follow that person for 12 weeks, you would never be able to track an extra gram of muscle protein synthesis a day. You can't. There's no measurable way of tracking that through muscle biopsy, through anything. And so they would do that study, and we follow these people 12 weeks utilizing insulin and blah 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 blah. No discernible increased rates of muscle protein synthesis or anabolism was detected. Well, yeah, but because it's such a small difference, but follow them for 20 years, and you would.
Yeah. Studies are definitely kind of hard to extrapolate to bodybuilders, and even to
we just have to understand their limitations, and that's the thing. Like in that case, if because small effects turn into big effects over a long enough time frame, you know,
Mhm.
and studies can't follow things for a long enough time frame.
And that's also the reason for nailing down those little 1%, because it's obviously not going to make the biggest changes, but over 10 years, over 20 years
Yep,
of a
yeah,
career, that's what actually does make the difference with
yeah,
people who aren't even the best, genetically gifted athletes. They really do need to pick up on those 1% of,
yep.
should I eat 1 gram per pound of body weight, or should I try to eat, 1.5 grams per lean body mass, for example, or just as much as I can eat without it negatively affecting my digestion. Um, Doing those little 1%, EAs, training to failure, not being scared of that, things like that.
Yeah. And to kind of tie this all up, because we're kind of over time, that like going back to what we started on, I think that's why that ends up being a good statement, is because we said 10 pounds of muscle a year. If you were to divide it evenly, and that's not going to happen, because you're going to have periods of better growth and slower growth, and you're probably not a 365-day off season. There might be dieting, but if you could, it's only 4 grams a day. So if you can add even 1 extra gram of muscle protein synthesis a day, you're increasing growth rate by 25%, you know? And so that's why you want to fight for every gram, because every gram makes a difference.
Yeah. The pennies after dollars. I think there's a huge disconnect between what we would call the science-based community, which I don't even like calling it that, because like we're all science-based, is just understanding the science, having a deep understanding. There's the guys who just, have that Dunning-Kruger aspect, don't actually read things, and they're like, I'm science-based. It's the fact that they're not serious competitors or like wanting to bodybuild, so they see these things that we're talking about that make a 1% difference, and they want to argue against it, and as if it's like, well, that's not going to make a big difference. And it's like, for you in the general population, sure, like don't stress over this, but we're talking to the people that want to maximize every outlet, and it's like inconceivable to them. And it's just, that's the disconnect. They don't want to do those extra things, which is fine. So they try to find justification within it and find all the reasons not to do it. But that's just, it doesn't change the fact that it does help, even if it's an incremental difference. That can very well make the difference between you winning a show or not.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, and not to keep but because you can even go the other end, though, is then people get so focused on the minor details that they don't do the major details, you know. And I used to make that argument with intra-workout shakes, is because I remember a client didn't do in their check-in, they missed a workout because they got to the gym and realized they didn't have their intra-workout shake. And I'm thinking like, so you thought just you thought not to do the workout, you know, like, no, the workout's still 99% of it. You know, the workout, we get that extra percent, but you gave up the 99% because you weren't going to get that 1%.
Yeah, that's funny. I know. All right, man. You got anything to plug? Anything you got going on before you wrap up here?
I mean, just to go, Troponin Nutrition. I'm hoping to get some e-courses out, but we have a bunch of books. I'm one of the coaches who I don't have a selection process, other than if I have spaces available and you are someone who wants to work hard and is motivated to work and interested in working with me. I don't care if you are a bodybuilder, or I don't care if you just want to lose weight, if you're a weekend warrior, or you're diabetic, or or you have IBS. If you want to work with, you like what I do, and you're motivated to work hard, I'm happy to work with you. I guess I got a sample right here. I'm coming out with a badass energy product that's effervescent, like Alka-Seltzer. So it'll drop right into a water bottle. I didn't say the ingredient on there. Good. It's got a badass ingredient that's not going to be legal very long, but isn't out yet. It was originally looked at as a nootropic, but in the studies of it, it had a Z-score of like 0.9, where like 90% of subjects reported an improved sense of well-being, and it creates like a sense of euphoria. It's like an energetic euphoria. And I won't say the ingredient because no one has it yet. It'll be everywhere probably soon. I hopefully get mine out before everyone else does, and it won't be legal that long. But it's you can tell I'm a little amped up. It's a really cool energy product.
All right, well, cool. I mean, I'm excited to see what it is. It sounds pretty cool, but we don't know much about what it is based off what you told
I
me.
mean, if you even look up like because it's everywhere, is like it shocked the researchers that like they were intentioning to look at it as a nootropic, but everyone reported like a sense of euphoria and well-being, and you can find it pretty easy if you look for it. But I don't want to say it because I don't have it released yet. We're still in R&D, but.
Okay, well, I guess stay on the lookout for that, guys. If you're not following Justin, make sure you check him out. I'll put his information down below. And thanks for coming on, man.